They didn't know I was coming. They didn't even know I was married. In their world, I still didn't matter enough to send an invitation. Not even a text. Not even a forwarded invite by mistake. My own father's retirement party held at a five-star venue he'd spent his entire life dreaming of, and I wasn't on the guest list. Not because they forgot, but because they remembered exactly who I was. The quiet son, the one who didn't shine in photos, the one who didn't win awards or get standing ovations at family dinners. That role belonged to Brienne. Always Brienne. My older sister with the perfect life, the sparkling laugh, the designer heels clicking like applause on marble floors. Every time she walked into a room, the lights seemed to follow her. And every time I walked in, no one even noticed. But not tonight. Tonight, I wore a navy tuxedo tailored to precision. Tonight, the lights followed someone else. When I entered the ballroom, the music kept playing, but the air changed. My mother's smile froze mid-laugh. My father's champagne flute tilted in his hand. And Brienne, radiant in her custom gown, blinked like her perfectly crafted world had just cracked in the middle. Then they saw him, the man walking beside me, confident and calm, hand resting on the small of my back like I was made of something valuable. William Haynes. The kind of name whispered in boardrooms and screamed across news headlines. My husband? My mother's mouth parted slightly. My father stepped forward like he might say something, but nothing came. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Let them feel it. The weight of absence finally turned presence. The sound of a door they thought would never reopen. I had spent years watching them celebrate Brienne while asking me to fetch drinks or fix the lighting. I had smiled through every dismissal, swallowed every sting. But tonight, the tables were set differently, and I was done being the invisible son. They didn't want me at their party. So I arrived as the man they'd have to applaud anyway. I was born 3 years after Brienne, which meant I was born 3 years too late to matter. By the time I came into the picture, the spotlight had already been claimed. She was beautiful, bold, and beaming from the moment she took her first breath, or so my parents always told it. My arrival, in comparison, was quiet and easy. The kind of baby who didn't cry much and knew how not to be a bother. That, in hindsight, should have been my first warning. My name is Bernard, and for most of my life, I was treated like a supporting role in the grand production of someone else's story. Brienne was the star, the daughter who could do no wrong. She was the kind of child parents dream about at dinner parties. She danced ballet at age 5, won spelling bees at age 7, hosted fundraisers by 13. Every photo on our family mantle had her at the center, grinning like she knew she belonged there. I was usually off to the side, cropped in or leaning halfway out of frame. My parents, especially my mother, adored her. She used to say, Brienne was born to lead while I was born to help. I didn't understand what that meant when I was a kid, but I understood the day she handed me her phone at Brienne's high school graduation and said, take as many pictures as you can, make sure she looks perfect. That day, she didn't take a single photo with me. My relationship with my family wasn't built on love. It was built on convenience. I was useful. I could help carry bags, set up chairs, pick up dry cleaning, make phone calls when Brienne didn't feel like it. My mother praised me when I was silent and scolded me when I asked for too much. You're lucky to have a sister like Brienne, she'd say, as if her success should count as mine. My father wasn't cruel, just absent. He existed in the margins of our lives like a piece of furniture you only notice when it stops working. By the time I turned 20, I had perfected the art of disappearing. I lived in the same house, at the same table, but I wasn't there. Not really. They'd talk over me, around me, past me. They'd forget my work schedule, my degree, my birthday. Once, my father introduced me to a colleague as Brienne's younger brother, and when I reminded him of my name, he laughed like I was joking. Brienne didn't mean to be cruel, not in the beginning. She was just used to being first. First to be hugged, first to be praised, first to be defended. And when that became routine, I became the afterthought. She once told me, during a fight, I didn't ask to be the favorite. That's just how it turned out. And maybe she believed that. Maybe she didn't understand what it was like to grow up watching your parents applaud someone else's success while pretending your existence was an accident they decided to keep. I didn't hate her. I hated what we became. I moved out the week after I graduated from college. No one helped me pack. No one even asked where I was going. I left behind a room that still had photos of Brienne taped to the mirror. She used to come in and use my vanity because the lighting was better. Even my reflection had to make room for her. It wasn't easy on my own. I worked 2 jobs to keep a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where sirens replaced lullabies. I ate noodles out of cups and spent nights wondering if my family noticed I was gone. They didn't. Not until Brienne called asking if I could design the seating chart for her engagement party. She offered no apology, just assumed I'd say yes. I said no. It was the first time I ever said no to her. The silence on the other end of the line was brief but sharp. Then came the scoff. Wow, you've changed. Yes, I had. And part of that change was William. I met him at a corporate workshop I almost didn't attend. I was there to refill coffee trays and take notes for the actual executives. He was one of the guest speakers, tall, sharp-featured, with a presence that silenced the room the moment he walked in. I expected him to ignore me. People like him usually did, but he didn't. He asked questions, not just polite ones, but curious ones, thoughtful ones. What would you do if you were in charge of this company tomorrow? I laughed, thinking he was mocking me. Probably resign. I'm just the assistant. But he didn't laugh. He leaned forward and said, "That's not what I asked." That conversation led to coffee. Coffee led to dinners. Dinners led to weekends. And weekends led to nights where I felt, for the first time, like I mattered. He saw me, really saw me, not as a prop, not as a convenient background character, but as someone worth listening to, someone worth standing beside. And months later, in a quiet ceremony attended only by people who'd chosen me, not people who'd been assigned to love me, I married him. We kept it quiet, not because we were hiding, but because no one back home would have cared. At least, not until they found out who I'd married. And that was the moment everything changed. The first sign of betrayal wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, casual even. The kind of subtle wound that doesn't bleed right away. A message popped up in a family group chat I'd been silently part of for years. The same thread where updates were shared, parties planned, and birthdays acknowledged except mine, of course. Brienne had sent a selfie in a gown, standing in the center of the retirement venue. The caption read, "Final walkthrough for Dad's big night. It's going to be stunning." Dozens of hearts and comments followed. My mother wrote, "You're amazing, sweetheart. Thank you for always making everything perfect." My father added, "Couldn't imagine this event without you at the helm. Without you." I stared at the words, waiting for my name to be mentioned. A thanks to Bernard too, maybe. Or let's make sure he's there. Nothing. Not even a mention. And that's when it clicked. They hadn't forgotten. They had deliberately decided not to invite me. Again, I closed the app. The screen went black, but the ache stayed sharp. I sat in the back of William's car, the city's skyline glowing outside the tinted window, but I felt like I was 13. Again, sitting on the edge of the staircase while everyone laughed downstairs at Brienne's birthday party when I helped plan but wasn't allowed to attend because I'd been moody lately. I turned toward William, my husband, my anchor, the only person who'd ever looked at me and seen more than a placeholder. "They're doing it again," I said. My voice was steady, but my fingers curled into fists in my lap. "Dad's party is tomorrow. Everyone's invited, except me." William's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't look surprised. "Do you want to go?" I hesitated. "I want them to know I see it, that I know what they're doing, that they don't get to pretend anymore." "Then we go," he said, just like that. "You'll walk in with me. You don't need an invitation to your own father's party. You're not crashing it, you're correcting it." But it wasn't just about being left out. That was old news. The real betrayal came 2 hours later, when Kelly, an old friend from college and now a rising PR director, called me, breathless. "Bernard, I just heard something." "What is it?" "I overheard Brienne at the Beaumont event. She was talking to a couple of industry reps, people from your sector. She said you and William weren't really married, that it was just a PR stunt to boost your image." The silence on my end was immediate. "Thick." She said what? She implied it was fake, that you were exaggerating your role in his company, that you've always had this need to feel important, and that William, well, that he was indulging you. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Kelly sighed, guilt heavy in her voice. "I wouldn't have told you if I thought she was just venting." But it wasn't that. She wanted them to believe it. She wanted them to discredit you. My heart didn't just sink, it folded in on itself. It had always been bad. The favoritism, the silence, the erasure. But this was active sabotage. Brienne didn't just forget me. She wanted to erase me, publicly. And for what? To protect her throne as the golden child? To make sure no light strayed from her orbit? When I told William, he didn't flinch. He placed his hand over mine and said, "Then we show them what a real marriage looks like, what real power looks like." The next night, we arrived at the venue precisely 15 minutes after the speeches had started on purpose. I wanted their attention, and I got it. The doors opened, and silence rippled across the ballroom like a gasp. My parents froze. Brienne stood mid-toast, crystal flute in hand, words caught in her throat. The applause that had followed her introduction died instantly. William walked beside me, calm, composed, devastatingly elegant, in a charcoal black tux. His hand didn't leave mine once. My mother blinked rapidly, stepping forward as if unsure whether to embrace or scold me. "Bernard, we didn't think you'd be invited," I said, smiling faintly. "Neither did I," my father cleared his throat. "We assumed you were busy. William must keep you very engaged." William leaned forward slightly, his tone smooth. "Busy, yes. We just returned from the Singapore summit." Bernard led the pitch that closed a 9-figure deal. Quite the engagement. My father's eyes twitched. My mother looked down. And Brienne? Her smile was frozen in place, but her eyes were flames. She lifted her glass again, struggling to recover. "Well, I suppose we have one more guest to celebrate. One more. Not equal, just more." I could have smiled, could have let it go, but I didn't, because the moment Brienne spread lies about my marriage about me was the moment I stopped playing nice. I stepped closer, calm, certain. "Actually, I think we should toast again. Not just for Dad but for the future. For those of us building something real." I watched her face, watched the twitch of her jaw, watched the cracks split across her perfect, performative calm. This wasn't about attention anymore. This was about reclaiming truth. Bernard stood near the far edge of the ballroom, the glass of untouched champagne still cold in his hand. Laughter echoed from the main floor. Soft jazz filled the space, and delicate chandeliers cast golden halos over a room that didn't want him. He could feel it. Not in words, no one dared say anything, but in stares, in the way conversations shifted. The second he and William entered, in the half smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes, this wasn't curiosity. This was surveillance. Brienne hadn't just stirred doubt. She'd planted it like poison, quietly and effectively. And now they were watching to see if the illusion cracked. His hands trembled slightly. He tucked one into his pocket, steadied the other on the glass. No one would notice the shake, but he felt it like a siren under his skin. Why now? Why was it hitting him here, of all places, surrounded by strangers in pearls and designer suits, in the same room where his father had once refused to stand for his graduation photo because Brienne needed the center spot? He tried to focus on William, whose calm presence had always grounded him. But even now, even with his husband's hand resting lightly on his back, Bernard felt hollow, because the wound wasn't new. It wasn't just tonight. It was every ignored birthday, every unreturned call, every time he showed up to be supportive and was handed a coat to hang. This party was just the final mirror. A cruel, expensive reflection of what he had always been in their lives, absent even when present. He thought leaving had been enough, thought distance would insulate him from their judgment, their erasure. He thought success would fill the void, but nothing could soften the sting of hearing your own sister publicly question your worth, and worse, believe it. Did she really think William married him out of convenience? Did she think it was all some clever stunt to elevate himself by association? She wasn't just jealous. She was convinced he hadn't earned any of it. His career, his relationship, his dignity. The thought made Bernard nauseous. He moved toward the restroom, heart pounding against his ribs, the noise of the ballroom falling away like a dim echo. He locked the door behind him and leaned over the sink, breathing hard. He wasn't crying, not quite, but the weight behind his eyes, the pressure pressing against his chest, it was close. He stared at his reflection, perfectly tailored suit, smooth skin, clear, cold eyes. A man who had rebuilt himself from ashes. A man no one had believed in except the one who mattered. So why did he feel so small? Because somewhere deep inside, a part of him still wanted them to love him, still wanted to be chosen, still wanted his mother to reach for him first, his father to say I'm proud, not out of obligation but because he meant it, and that soft, hidden part was breaking under the weight of a lifetime of pretending not to care. A knock came. Bernard didn't move. Another knock. Then William's voice, low and calm. Hey, I'm here. He unlocked the door and let him in. William stepped in without asking questions, without pressing. He leaned against the wall, watching him. It's okay to be upset. Bernard shook his head, voice hoarse. I thought I was past it. I thought I didn't need them anymore. You don't need them, William said. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Bernard looked down. She made it sound like I'm a joke. Like I don't deserve anything I've built. William stepped forward, gently lifting Bernard's chin until their eyes met. You're not a joke. And you didn't build this life on her approval. You built it in spite of her. That line hit deep. I know, Bernard whispered. But it's exhausting, Will. Always having to prove something. Always wondering if this us will ever be seen as enough. I want to be angry, but I just feel tired. William wrapped an arm around him and pulled him close, steady and warm. Then be tired. I'll stand until you can again. The words lodged in Bernard's throat like a sob that wouldn't come out. He didn't need applause. He didn't need forgiveness. But he needed this just for a second to be held without question. He let himself rest. Just for a moment. And when he pulled back, his breath steadier, he looked in the mirror again. Same suit, same eyes, but the weariness had softened. There was pain, yes, but now there was purpose too, because maybe Brienne could smear his name. Maybe their parents would keep pretending he was background noise, but he wasn't the same Bernard anymore, and he wouldn't stay silent this time. He squared his shoulders, straightened his cuffs, and walked out of that restroom like a man who wasn't waiting for approval anymore. He had arrived at this party a guest. He would leave it unforgettable. Bernard was just beginning to regain his footing when the second blow came, and this one landed deeper. He was near the dessert table, chatting with a board member William had introduced him to earlier, when the music paused and a sharp clink of glass echoed through the room. The microphone squealed for a moment, then quieted. Brienne stood at the podium. Again. Before we wrap up this lovely night, she said, flashing a smile that barely reached her eyes, I just want to say how proud I am of our father. Everything I've ever accomplished, I owe to his guidance and strength. Polite applause followed. Bernard didn't move. Brienne glanced around the room, letting the silence stretch just a little too long. Then she tilted her head slightly, her voice sweet as syrup. And of course, it's lovely to see some unexpected faces here tonight. Laughter. The polite kind that stung. A few guests looked in Bernard's direction. He narrowed his eyes. She wasn't finished. I'm sure most of you have read the headlines. The whirlwind romance. The wedding that no one knew about. Her gaze slid toward Bernard and William. Some people chase privacy. Others just chase attention. That landed audibly. A low ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Bernard's fingers clenched around the edge of the table. William moved beside him, his jaw locked. Brienne smiled, innocent as ever. But hey, success comes in many forms. Some inherit it, some earn it, and some. She trailed off, as if the implication spoke for itself. Either way, we all play our parts, don't we? She raised her glass. To family, to control. That's what it really was. Bernard didn't respond, not yet. He held still, his pulse drumming in his ears. The words were polished, measured, dressed in grace, but they were daggers. And now, the room was watching him again, not out of curiosity, but out of judgment, wondering if Brienne's version of the story was the real one, that Bernard had married up, that he was pretending, that everything about him was too perfect to fast, a manufactured success story. He turned toward William. She planned that. William nodded. Of course she did. She wants to corner me, publicly. She's pushing you to react, to explode, so you fit her narrative. And that was the moment the second twist clicked into place. Not that Brienne was trying to humiliate him, but that she was afraid of him, because for the first time in their lives, Bernard had something she didn't, unpredictability. She didn't know how much influence he had now. She didn't know how far he'd come, who was in his corner, how many doors he could open without her. And so, she was trying to drag him back down to where she felt safe, back to where he was the quiet one, the ignored one, the ghost in the background. But she'd miscalculated. She thought Bernard would fold under pressure. She didn't realize the man she used to overshadow had learned how to build his own light. Bernard lifted his glass, calm and composed. To family, he echoed, loud enough for everyone to hear, and to knowing when to walk away from the ones that don't deserve you. A beat of silence. Then a few guests actually clapped. Quiet, at first, then louder. Brienne's smile faltered. That was it. The second twist wasn't just her public jab. It was the realization that Bernard didn't need their approval anymore, and now, the crowd didn't either. Bernard didn't plan to take the microphone. He hadn't come to his father's retirement party with the intention of making a scene. But then again, he hadn't come expecting to be publicly humiliated either. The tension from Brienne's speech still lingered, and the guests awkwardly returned to their flutes of champagne and whispered conversations. Bernard made a choice. Not to retaliate but to reclaim. He walked calmly toward the podium, not rushed, not flustered. He didn't ask permission. He didn't glance at his parents. He simply stepped into the light, adjusted the mic, and spoke. I wasn't planning to say anything tonight, he began, his voice measured, smooth. After all, it's not my event. I wasn't even invited. Murmurs flickered across the room like sparks in dry brush. But since we're celebrating family, he continued, eyes steady on the crowd, maybe now's the time to talk about what that word actually means. He paused, not for effect but to gather himself, to weigh the cost of what came next. For some, family means support, celebration, belonging. For others, it's a story of silence, of always being the one behind the camera, never in the photo. He didn't name Brienne. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. I was raised in this very home, in this family, alongside the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And for years, I believed it was my job to keep the spotlight shining on her, even if it meant dimming myself in the process. He heard his mother shift uncomfortably, saw his father glance down, lips pressed in a line. I was the helper, the errand boy, the polite, quiet sibling who didn't ask for much because I was taught that needing love was the same as being selfish. He let that one hang in the air, long enough for a few of the guests to look visibly uncomfortable. But then something happened, Bernard said, his voice tightening. I left. I stopped trying to earn what should have been given freely. I built my own life, not out of spite but out of necessity. Because there comes a time when surviving under someone else's shadow stops feeling like loyalty and starts feeling like slow death. He met Brienne's eyes across the room. She looked frozen, pale, like the mirror she spent years avoiding had finally been held in front of her. My success didn't come from stealing anyone's spotlight. It came from years of being unseen and deciding I was worthy anyway. He felt the heat rising in his chest, but he didn't let it break his tone. I didn't marry for image. I didn't invent my worth. And I didn't come here to fight. But I also didn't come here to be shamed for finally standing in my own light. The room was silent. Not out of discomfort anymore but out of respect. William stood at the back, his hands folded, pride radiating from every inch of his calm expression. I have nothing to prove tonight, Bernard said, shoulders square, voice steel beneath silk. Not to this room, not to this family, and certainly not to anyone who still believes love and success are things to be rationed like attention at a dinner table. His gaze flicked once sharp, brief to his parents. If anyone here feels uncomfortable, he added, imagine what it's like to grow up that way. He stepped back from the mic. No applause. Not yet. Just silence. A reverent, heavy silence that settled over the room like truth that had finally found its voice. And then someone clapped. A single hand. Then another. And then the wave. Not forced. Not polite. But honest. The applause grew not thunderous, but enough to echo off the chandeliered ceiling and make Brienne's perfectly composed expression twist slightly at the edges. Bernard returned to William's side, his face calm but burning. That was bold, William murmured. No, Bernard said quietly. That was overdue. His mother approached a few minutes later. Her lips were trembling, and her voice didn't have the same performative tone she used at fundraisers or brunches. Bernard, that was true, he finished. It was true. She nodded once, then again, like she wasn't sure what else to do. I didn't know you felt that way. He looked her in the eye. Not harshly, but without retreat. That's the problem. You never asked. Behind her, his father hovered. He didn't step forward. He didn't say anything. But the look in his eyes wasn't pride. It was recognition. Maybe for the first time in Bernard's life, Brienne, she didn't come over. She slipped out before dessert was served, and for once, her absence didn't empty the room, because for the first time, Bernard wasn't the one disappearing. He had stood in the same room that once made him feel invisible and made himself undeniable. Bernard didn't return to his family's house after the retirement party. He didn't answer his mother's 3 missed calls, nor did he reply to the sudden text from his father that simply said, "Proud of you. Call me." Too late. He and William drove back to their penthouse apartment in silence at first, the city lights flashing past the windows like muted fireworks. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. William reached over, fingers brushing Bernard's knuckles. "You didn't just survive tonight," he said quietly. "You owned it." Bernard didn't answer. He was still processing it, all the weight of years, the sting of being erased, the exhaustion of finally being seen. But the moment that looped in his mind over and over was Brienne's face, the panic in her eyes, the realization that she couldn't twist the narrative anymore, that she'd tried to humiliate him and failed publicly. That was his revenge, not yelling, not confrontation, dismantling her fiction in front of the very people she'd tried to impress. The next morning, Bernard woke up to headlines. CEO's husband shuts down rumors with a speech that left the room speechless. Bernard Sinclair, the silent brother, who became the storm fatos from the event, had leaked. Clips of his speech were already circulating in corporate circles, on social platforms, in group chats. People weren't just noticing him, they were admiring him. He'd spent years fading into the background. Now he was the one everyone wanted to hear from. And as the world finally took notice, so did someone else. The chairman of an elite board Bernard had long respected and quietly dreamed of joining called that very afternoon. "We'd like to invite you to consult with us," the man said, privately at first. "But long term, this could be your stage." Bernard almost laughed. A year ago, he was folding napkins and pouring drinks for these very types of men. Now they wanted him at the table, and it wasn't because of William. It was because of him, because of what he'd said, because of what he'd built. Later that week, Bernard received a card in the mail. No envelope, just the card, from Brienne. "If that's who you are now, I suppose I never really knew you at all. No apology, no ownership, just ego dressed in regret." Bernard didn't reply. He didn't need to. But fate wasn't done handing out receipts. A month later, the gossip columns buzzed with whispers. Brienne's high-profile consulting deal had been quietly terminated. Rumors suggested unprofessional conduct, unsubstantiated claims about a family scandal, apparently some of her past remarks about Bernard and William had resurfaced. An anonymous leak. Bernard didn't confirm or deny anything when asked. He simply said, "In today's world, your words tend to stick, even if you said them in confidence." That was the final shift. The golden girl was slipping. And Bernard, he was just getting started. William suggested they take a trip Paris, maybe Tokyo. But Bernard had another idea. "Let's go home," he said, "just for the weekend." "Home?" William asked, cautious. "You sure?" "I don't need to prove anything anymore," Bernard said. "But I think I'd like them to see what I've built, on my terms." So they went, back to the suburb that had once felt like a trap. The family home where Bernard's face had never hung on the wall. When his parents opened the door, they stood, frozen for a moment. They hadn't expected to see him again, certainly not like this. Bernard wore no anger on his face, no bitterness, just quiet strength. His mother ushered them in, offering tea, pretending as if things were normal. His father asked about the business, but the house felt different now, smaller, duller. They sat in the living room, the same one where Bernard once folded chairs while Brienne unwrapped gifts in a tiara. "I came here," Bernard said after a long pause, "not to reconnect, but to close the door properly." His mother's smile faltered. "Close it?" "I'm not angry," he said, "but I'm done trying, done hoping one of you would eventually notice the version of me that wasn't Brienne's brother or your convenient errand boy." His father cleared his throat. "Son, we were trying our best." Bernard looked him in the eye. "No, you were trying to shape me into someone who didn't inconvenience your narrative. You raised a daughter you worshipped and a son you forgot." The words were like a knife, but not spoken with venom, spoken with peace, with finality. "I didn't come for forgiveness. I came to leave nothing unfinished." He stood. William followed. His mother rose too. "We're still your family, Bernard." Bernard turned once at the door. "Family isn't blood. Family is who builds you up, not who edits you out." He left the house and didn't look back, not out of anger, but because there was nothing behind him worth seeing anymore. The chapter had closed. 2 weeks later, Bernard received confirmation. He'd been offered the board seat, a full voting position, influence, respect, autonomy. At the press conference announcing his appointment, a reporter asked, "You're known as the husband of CEO William Haynes. How much of your success do you credit to your marriage?" Bernard smiled, polite, deliberate, and unshakable. "I was already successful," he said. "My marriage didn't make me powerful. It made me visible. The power was always mine." The applause was long and loud. Later that night, Bernard and William stood on their penthouse balcony, the city glittering below them. "Do you feel it?" William asked. Bernard nodded. "I do." "What is it?" "Freedom," Bernard whispered. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not surviving anyone's shadow. I'm standing in my own sun." He turned toward William, eyes steady. "And I'm never giving that up again." The past hadn't broken him. It had sharpened him, and now, he wasn't the forgotten son. He wasn't the background character. He wasn't the invisible brother. He was Bernard Sinclair, board member, power player, husband, and the man his family would never forget again.